Perfect. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second last talk in this year's series. So we're joined tonight by Cahal McLaughlin from the Northern Ireland Prisons Memory Archive. Cahal is a director of the Prisons Memory Archive and professor of film studies at Queen's University, Belfast. He's a filmmaker with decades of experience in filmmaking and writing, with an emphasis on research in areas of political conflict, including South Africa, Haiti, Brazil, and Peru. So I'm going to hand over to Cahal now to go through his presentation on the Prison Memory Archive. So I'll share the screen, and Cahal, you can let me know when you are ready to go on to the next slide.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll start then talking, if that's okay. Thank you very much, Cara, for the invitation to talk about the Prisons Memory Archive. And thank you to the audience for attending in person or online. Not in person, online or on record, I should say. In a sense, the direction of this talk will be about telling stories from conflict and how that is a challenging project for any organization or individual. And I'm going to use the Prisons Memory Archive as a case study. As you know, there were 30 years of political conflict in the north of Ireland between 1968 and 98, approximate dates there. They came to an end with the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. The prisons closed in the year 2000. And as a filmmaker, primarily, I was really interested in how you tell the story of a conflicted past in a contested present. And by contested present, I mean that while there are occasional small hiccups of violence, there is still a political lack of agreement as to how to move forward in our society. And that is the environment in which we're trying to think about how we address the legacy of the past. There have been attempts officially by the state to organize the equivalent of, let's say, the TRC in South Africa. And they tend to have three legs to stand on. One is prosecutions, one is truth recovery, and one is storytelling or oral history. And these are the four that we have had in the North. The first one, we will remember them. The second one, report of the consultative group on the past. Then the Haas-Sullivan recommendations. Then the Stormont House Agreement, where all political parties agreed. And then the Conservative government, after the fall of Stormont, coming in with its own Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy Bill. All of these initiatives have proposed storytelling or oral history, and it's an interchangeable phrase, as one aspect of how to address the past. This vacuum that none of these have been implemented has been filled by community groups. And we reckon there are up to about 50 different community or academic initiatives. And the more famous ones are Healing Through Remembering, which is actually a network of storytelling, and Accounts of the Conflict at Ulster University, which is a collection online of about 12 initiatives, oral history projects from the bottom up by communities. So the Prisons Memory Archive is just one of many. Sorry, I should have said, Cara, to move on. I beg your pardon. Okay. So if you go to slide, I've just talked about the four. Yeah, and then the next one. Let me see, where are we now? Yes, if you go to next one. As a filmmaker, I have found that when you ask people to remember and to articulate that experience. Where they are situated is central to how they remember. And so if you bring someone back to the prisons, they start to remember in a way that would be very different if they were at home or in their office or whatever. So I began to think about this idea of, because the prisons were empty, I began to think about how we might deal with this situation. The prisons themselves were touchstone and tinderbox throughout the conflict, in the sense that it had the highest, our society, the highest proportion of population in prison in the whole of Europe. In fact, the Maze and Long Kesh prison was the largest prison in Europe during the conflict. There are also good framing devices, because as a filmmaker or an historian, you need a framework within which to work. What do people talk about? And then maybe what people don't talk about, because it starts to take you off in a different direction. And the great thing about a physical place like that is that you can only walk so far, no matter how big it is, and the memory would be contained within that. The idea was there's so many experiences and memories of the conflict, as experienced by people who were in prison, that happened before and happened after they were released. This seemed to us too big a project. If we kept the subject within the prison walls, that would allow us to have this framing device. And the really interesting thing about someone remembering is not only is their memory stimulated by the physicality, materiality of the site, they would walk around a corner and see a bed, or around another corner and see a kitchen, and it would stimulate something in their memory. But also they performed their memory. And I'm going to show a couple of examples. So people are not standing still generally. They're moving in and out. They're pointing. The camera operator's moving backwards and forwards. There's constant movement as the memory is performed. That, I think, helps audiences. And the term that we would use as filmmakers is be there when that story is being told. Okay. Next one, please. Because our society went through a lot of media coverage. As you know, there was censorship by the Dublin government, by the London government. The media was regarded by many communities, Republican and Loyalist working class communities, as untrustworthy. They felt that the agenda set in Dublin, the agenda set in London, often excluded them. And this distrust of the media had to be addressed when you bring out a camera and ask someone to tell their story. And one of the things that I found is most allowing the building of trust is co-ownership. So if these people co-own their own recording, then they might feel they trust me in recording them. I'll talk later on about the risks and rewards of that. The other reason for co-ownership is to address this issue, the risk of re-traumatization. If someone is talking about an experience that's quite violent, and these were extremely violent places, not just for prisoners, but also prison officers, there is a risk of re-traumatization. And we felt co-ownership, where one tells one story and takes co-ownership and co-authorship of one story, it mitigates and minimizes that risk. It does not remove it, but we talked and we prepared ourselves by talking to a psychotherapist beforehand. And reclaiming your own narrative is one way that people can use to help address past trauma. Inclusivity. It was really important. In the mainstream media, there tends to be a dominant narrative around the Republican movement versus the British state. The little guy against the big guy, as they would say in Hollywood. We knew that the stories were much more complex than that, and we wanted the prison officers, we wanted the teachers, the chaplains, the visitors, the maintenance workers, the solicitors, as many as possible. So that was really important for us. And the third one was life storytelling. And this comes back to co-ownership. If you own your own story, then you should not be asked leading questions. And I've worked in television and I know how the media works. And if I want a particular answer, I know that I will have to ask a particular question. But because we wanted to share authorship and share the agenda setting, we took a leaf out of life storytelling where you don't ask questions or you ask minimum questions. And this was very easy in the context of an empty prison because people were stimulated. You often didn't have to ask anything of anyone, they just took off. And I put in Boston College there. I'm not going to go into it in any great detail, but Boston College is a really good example of what not to do in an oral history project in terms of asking leading questions, as well as promising something you can't keep, such as secrecy. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. The locations, we filmed in two key locations. The first one was Armagh Gaol, the women's prison, and the Maze and Long Kesh, the men's prison. And we filmed for 2 weeks in 2006 in the Armagh Gaol and 3 weeks in 2007 in Maze and Long Kesh. We didn't have complete access to all the prisons. Armagh Gaol was a Victorian prison that was emptied actually in 1989, I think, before the end of the conflict, because it was so rotten, it was so old. And female prisoners were sent to McAberry Jail, which was still functioning, so we couldn't have access to that. But health and safety meant there were certain parts of those jails we couldn't access. So what we did with each recording, we advertised, we contacted groups. We ended up with 160 people, or recordings rather. What we decided to do was do a briefing and debriefing, and we had only one camera operator with a radio mic. We did not have a crew because we wanted it to be an equal shared experience, a conversation rather than an interview. And so we asked one camera operator with a radio mic to go out with someone and to walk around the prison. And we set this up for about 15 minutes with the person before they went out, looking at the equipment, discussing the protocols and how they felt, what they were comfortable with, including what they wanted to talk about and, importantly, what they didn't want to talk about. We also had a counselor, a trauma counselor, talk to the crew because we were asking them to do deep listening before they went out. And we also offered it to all participants afterwards. So that if anyone wanted to, if they felt that they had been re-stimulated and were anxious and worried, there were phone numbers for them to go and contact people. I'm going to show you a couple of clips, but what we ended up with was 160 walk and talk recordings, filmed recordings, 300 hours in total of audiovisual material, because that also includes walkthroughs of the prisons, because we knew they were being demolished. There are 1,000 photographs that we took during those 5 weeks. And what's really interesting about this work and why the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland agreed to take this archive was because it complements the official record. Sorry, Cara, I should have said to move on to the next one. Beg your pardon. I'm ahead of myself. So this complements the official record. So you have the documentation from the British government, from the prison authority, from the different departments. You have the court records. You have a number of things that are all text-based. And here we come up with something which was filmed, a sense of liveness of being back inside those prisons again. And they thought that was a really good complement to the official records that they hold. We also have a website, and the website is designed to be educationally orientated. So there are different ways into the selected material, and I won't show you that now. You can go into it and look at for yourself. The website probably has about 5% of the total of these 300 hours of material. The website probably has about 5% of that. The full archive sits at the Public Record Office in the Titanic Quarter of Belfast. So you can go there and get a full access to the archive, or go to the website to get a flavour of it. So we'll go to the next one. And I want to show two examples. In a sense, for us, these illustrate different aspects of the motivation, the rationale for going in. Josie Dowds is a Republican ex-prisoner who gave birth while in prison, while serving a sentence. And she takes us along a corridor to where the cell where she gave birth and looked after the baby. And then she kind of steps back and remembers what it was like to be in that environment, to have a baby inside the prison, and actually the support that she got from the other female prisoners. And I want you to also observe what's happening with the camera operator. Because when Josie first goes to the door and says, "That's it," the camera operator, Deirdre, is looking at her with the window behind which silhouettes Jackie. And what Deirdre does is a sort of a degree of choreography. Deirdre is waiting for a moment to turn around so that her back is to the light and the light is on Josie as Josie tells her story. So Cara, maybe if you play that, I think it's only about 1 minute.
Perfect. I'll just have to stop sharing this screen and then
Okay,
click
thank you.
into it and then reshare.
Okay.
Just might take a minute to upload.
Okay.
So let me go back into Zoom. And I'll share this screen. Can you see it? You might give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
There it is now.
And my bed might have run along the top of the radiator and Kevin's cot would have come down this way. I'd have brought Kevin back to this cell or the one next door. Kevin didn't lose out as far as love and affection was concerned. There was plenty here to give it. He was the only baby in the wing. And at night when we'd go in to lock up, I'd sit and play with him and a wee infectious giggle, which could be heard all over the wing. The echo, the whole wing in the prison. Never short of babysitters. You're going to have a bath or do something or just wanted an hour on your own, any of the girls would have took Kevin. He was fighting over Kevin as to who wanted to play with him and whatever else. And the day that Kevin was going out of here was very hard on not just himself, but every girl in here at that time. When I come out of that cell to walk down, to go to the visiting room to hand Kevin over, could have been, I'd say maybe 10, 15 girls on each side of this from here on down. And every one of them was crying and saying their goodbyes to him. I was actually trying to cheer them up. I remember.
Thank you, Cara.
No problem. I'll go back into the main presentation again.
Okay, and I'll just mention again that the camera operator and choreography I've mentioned, but the other thing that's interesting is that we invited the participants to become the co-directors, to take ownership. And so you notice Josie walking off, turning her back to the camera operator, because she knew that the radio mic allowed her voice to continue to be heard and the camera operator would follow her. So that just that little clip there of Josie shows a number of things that are going on that's allowed to happen in an atmosphere where you have access to the physical space, where you have co-ownership, and where the camera operator is prepared to follow on and not necessarily direct the participant. And so the memory can flow. The second clip, and these are clips from, some people recorded for half an hour, some people recorded for 4 hours. John was one of those, John, the prison officer. And what I want to the reason I think John is interesting is because John was a prison officer during that period. And he's one of the few prison officers who appear to stop and reflect quite self-critically on what went on. And he's here at the entrance to the hospital wing, and that is where 10 hunger strikers died in 1981, and he was around at that time. And while as camera operators and audience people who are present watching this, movement is wonderful to see people move about and point and whatnot. And John subverts that. He stops. He suddenly stopped. He's been moving around the site. He's been doing all of this, and he suddenly stops because the memory of what happened inside that hospital, which he's very reluctant to go into, jolts him. And so he tells us why.
When I came in here, I stood, perhaps unconsciously, with my back, in actual fact, to a certain part of the hospital, and perhaps for good reason, because I'm not entirely sure that I can actually visit there, because I was actually there on certain occasions during the hunger strike. I had duties to perform here. And I recall all too sharply and too vividly some of the things that I saw at that particular time. They were dignified, but they were very painful. And I can not see a photograph of some of the lads who were here. Or I cannot even think of their relatives, their mothers, sisters, brothers, who I spoke to. And I know the sheer agony that they were going through. And you would need to have a heart of stone not to feel some sympathy for what was happening. We treated them with the utmost humanity and respect, and they reciprocated because they thanked the staff here for their many acts of kindness. And it was the sheer hopelessness and madness of it all that I think still touches us today.
Okay, thank you, Cara. And if we can go on to the next one. On the slides, I suppose you won't be getting the slides, but let me see now. Maybe I could show one more, Jackie Upton, because this one's quite unique as well. There are very few loyalist women in Armagh Gaol. Loyalist women were not regarded as being allowed to be members of paramilitary groups. And so Armagh Gaol, the political prison for women, was primarily occupied by Republican women. But some loyalists were there, and they were used, in a sense, by the governor to try and prevent what was called political status. The Republicans were the majority in the wing. They wanted the whole wing to be Republican. And by putting one Protestant loyalist prisoner in there, it disrupted that claim that the Republicans had. And Jackie was very conscious of that and very angry that she was used in that way. So if you want to play Jackie here.
I chose not to commit a sale. I was 23, it was very intimidating. You couldn't walk down the wing. I mean, if you walked down the wing, you were sitting out like this and it was the feet was up. You know, you couldn't get past. You know, that's the way they'd set. With their chairs, obviously they brought a chair out and they put the feet up. So if you'd walk down the wing, you were talking about 5 or 6 people. But I had a prison officer on me all the time, got guarantees. You'll be okay, you'll be all right, we'll watch you. But mental torture is just not. You just can't explain, you know. And women are more bitchy than men. I mean, sitting in the television room alone, I never in the TV room. It was so intimidating. And your meals were served down that bottom. The meals was brought up on a hot plate, like down the very bottom here. The meals were served, and at one time, Republicans served us the meals, so we refused then to take the meals off the Republican prisoners, so they didn't like it. So then the prison officer started serving the food. So when I was eventually left on my own, then it just got worse. So I just refused to come out of the cell, and I just refused to take any meals, and couldn't understand why they wouldn't move me to B wing, knowing there was other Protestant prisoners on that wing. And the only explanation I come up with is because if they moved me, that this A2 wing would have total segregation of all Catholic prisoners, and that was the only reason I could find that they wouldn't It wouldn't move me.
Okay, thank you, Cara. And we'll move on to the next slide. Funding was a real challenge. We managed to get funding at the early stages to do the recordings in 2006 and 7, when the political atmosphere up here was relatively stable. The National Heritage Lottery Fund funded us, but we waited 10 years to get post-production funding to edit material and make it available publicly. And that's because in the intervening years, something happened. There was an attempt to set up an international reconciliation centre at the old Maze site. 20 million euro was sent from Brussels to do that, designed by Daniel Liebskin. It was a fantastic proposal. Within the Democratic Unionist Party, the largest party at the time, rumblings of dissent because they were concerned that it would become a memorial to the terrorists. And this debate went on for some time. And then finally, the First Minister, Peter Robinson, was threatened with an election within his party, and he pulled out and the money was sent back to Europe. And that period of time, no one would touch us. No one would touch this archive and help us make it available publicly. Things after 10 years began to settle a little bit more. And we went back to the Heritage Lottery Fund, who said, guarantee to us that you'll find a partner to show this stuff and we'll consider it. And we were very lucky that the Public Record Office, who had previously not been interested, nor had any of the big institutions, Ulster Museum, none of them had been interested, mostly because of the political climate. But that was beginning to change, and the Public Record Office said, okay, we'll take it. And we put in a joint application to post-produce the material, which took 3 years. By post-producing, I don't mean just editing, because we asked individuals to look at their material again, and if they wanted to remove anything, and some small anecdotes here and there were pulled out for reasons that were personal, maybe political, maybe legal. Most of it stayed, the vast majority of it stayed. So that then had to all be identified descriptors, agreed descriptors between us and the Public Record Office, between the government and the constituent parties. We would have words that they would not find searchable. Screw is a word for a prison officer. It doesn't appear in the Public Record Office. So there was lots of debates and discussion about terminology. We got little bits of funding in between. Community Relations Council allowed us to make a film called Armagh Stories, and a PhD scholarship allowed us to make a couple of projects. One was called We Were There, and these films are on our website. And We Were There is really interesting because I'm going to talk about that if you go on to the next screen, Cara. We Were There was edited 10 years after it was filmed by a PhD student at Ulster University. And it was the experience of women in the men's prison. So she looked at all of those women, whether they were probation officers, teachers, visitors, medical staff, etc., who were in the archive, had experienced the men's prison, and then found a kind of a common narrative here. And they edited a wonderful film called We Were There. We also made a couple of other films on my stories and other things from scholarships, etc. These films then got screened. And I think this is a really interesting, point about who watches the archive. Yes, individuals go into the Public Record Office, they go onto the website. But when there is an opportunity for a discussion and a debate about this material, things get quite interesting. And we have to be really careful. And we've had some wonderful successes, and we've had one notable problem. We Were There went to, it was a women's group up in it's called the Black Mountain Shared Space. And the community worker there said, on either side of the peace line, the peace wall in West Belfast, women come together, they will talk about everything that's contemporary, that's really important to them. education, employment, transport, etc., housing. They won't talk about the past. And we think your film might help unlock that. We Were There worked because the women in the film all share something. And what they share is that they're women in a male environment. And so when the film was premiered, all those women in the film came to the premiere and shared their stories live in front of an audience at the Belfast Film Festival. And it worked. And the community worker said afterwards that in the post-screening discussion, they didn't discuss the film at all, but they used the safe space that was created there to tell each other their own stories. And they started a dialogue, which apparently continued thereafter, where they began to tell each other about their father, their mother, their brother, their sister, who was imprisoned, who was killed, who was lost, etc. So the film worked in helping create a safe space. Armagh Stories, which had prisoners, prison officers, as well as visitors and teachers and whatnot, is a slightly more difficult film in that they're competing memories, voices there. And when we showed it at Armagh Local History Library, it went down really well and the audience was predominantly elderly, my age, elderly women who really wanted to know what went on behind these big walls. And that was very positive. We showed the same film several years later when ex-service personnel organisation wanted them to start telling their story. So they were made up of people who had been in the police service, RUC, British Army, other security forces. And we went and showed that film to them. And it was disastrous. It was very counterproductive. Although the chair had seen the film has Republican ex-prisoners talking about their experience in the prison. At the time of us showing the film, were ministers in the government. And the response of the audience there was that we risked our lives to put these terrorists behind bars. And now you've got films where they're justifying what they did. Of course, they didn't justify what they did. But the sense of anger, I think, and pain from that meeting showed that when you're showing this stuff, you have to be really, really careful. Okay, if we go on to the next slide. A really important thing is that the management of this whole process includes the participants. And we have what started off as a management group has now renamed itself an advisory group. And they continue to meet, not very, maybe once or twice a year, but they're made up of the participants, mixed participant group. And that's really healthy. There's also a steering group made up of people from the Prison Memory Archive, Queen's University Belfast, and the Public Record Office. And we have ongoing activities. We've edited a book collection that was out last year. And they have participant contributions in that. It's not just an academic book, but also participant contributions. We continue to do workshops like this. We attend conferences, and we're part of a broader now called the Conflict and Legacy Interpretive Network, where all those who gather collections of memories and artifacts are beginning to come together to try and create a network or a federation museum. Okay, next. I think that might be us now. Risks and rewards, I think, if I remember rightly. Yeah. Not all issues are covered with life storytelling. They didn't talk about why they were imprisoned. Another risk is that if you have one camera operator, the sound can be the one that maybe is least paid attention to, and you can sometimes get sound peaking. There was a very limited period to film in. We know that many people would have liked to have contributed to it, but after those access days, no one ever get back in again. We couldn't get back into the prison. We would try to get back in years later. The lack of anonymity prevented some people from coming forward and telling their story. And we have had withdrawals. We have had 6 loyalists, 2 prison officers, and a Republican female prisoner withdraw. They have the right co-ownership has the right to do that. And they've done it for different reasons, some for personal, some for political, some for legal, I think I mentioned earlier. But the overall balance remains quite good, quite inclusive, and we're very happy with that. And so the reward is that we have a unique archive of filmed prison memories from our conflict. So that's me finished.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cahal. That was an absolutely amazing presentation. I really loved your focus on the camera direction as a mode for storytelling. I was definitely keeping my eyes out on what they were actually doing and how they were like making it like reflecting even just the emotion of what they were saying. So I'll have to keep my eyes out when I go through the archive further for other films. I actually have a few questions myself for you.
Okay.
So you listed that when you were doing the project, things like co-ownership, inclusivity, life storytelling, asking like no leading questions, and having like trauma counseling available. That's all like standard, amazing standard practice for like authentic community engagement. And it's really, really trauma informed. Would you have any other suggestions when you're embarking on a community engagement project like this, where you might be dealing with maybe marginalized communities or communities that might have experienced trauma in the past? Is there any suggestions you have for kind of embarking on that?
One of the things that we underestimated, and all our funders underestimated, is time.
Yeah.
It takes time. Do not rush. Do not be pressured.
Absolutely.
Do not
even
pressure
to build the
people you're working
relationships
with.
in the first place, so people are comfortable even to open up.
Absolutely. And give people time to change their minds. Give people time to, I think the co-ownership is one of the biggest. Prison officers were very clear with us. They would not have contributed if we hadn't given them that. Involving them as much as possible in the bigger picture. They may not want to be involved, but at least it makes the process transparent so they know. I mean, for us, what was really important right at the beginning, it took years actually to get permission from some of these constituencies. For example, when one constituency heard that another constituency was going to take part in it, they said, we're not going to share the screen with those people. And so it just takes time. And a lot of it is also about the context. Sometimes you just have to wait. And one of the project managers at one point said, well, we waited 10 years because we had to. There's a reason we had to wait 10 years. If we tried to do it earlier, it wouldn't have worked. So I think the idea of time and transparency and openness so that people are aware of what's happening is really, really important.
Amazing. And in regards to like withdrawals, if someone did contact to withdraw from the project, how is that dealt with? Is like all of the information that they've given you destroyed completely? Just how did you deal with that as an issue?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it was easy in a sense to go through and destroy the tapes and the copies. And what we're doing actually now, because we're finally kind of getting to the stage of the teams departed, the funding has ended, and there's loads of material sitting in filing cabinets. And I'm going to be retiring at the end of this year. So I and some of the volunteers who've worked on it are going to go through every single thing. And I think you're right. I think we've made that decision. We did ask one or two of them, and they said all references to us to be removed. And you can tell if that's personal or political. It tends to be, if someone's withdrawing for political reasons, then it tends to be, they want everything, no reference whatsoever. So we're going to have to meticulously go through every single digital and hard copy and remove everything as if they never took part.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah, it's a lot. Did you have any like issues with the archival process? So I know I kind of mentioned at the start, like I'd say so many different people had different requirements for their information. So some people probably wanted their names extracted from things, and some people kind of gave you full inclusivity. How did you manage all of that information with all of the participants that you have? Do you have any tips for even just doing that?
overall, we found that we wish we had talked to Public Record Office a lot more. Well, no, we couldn't have. When we did the first recordings in 2006 and 7, legislation around consent forms and was very different to what it was 10 years later. And so while everyone has signed off on their contributions at the beginning, we had to go back to every single person because the legislation around GDP had changed. So everyone had to re-sign. And what complicated it was that if you mention someone else, they have to give you permission.
Yes, I
That's
get you.
really complicated. So you'll find if you're listening, someone telling a story about, say, digging a tunnel or something, and they say, and they mention someone else is helping them, because that person's liable to be charged. Actually, still, we had to remove that. But another reason we had to remove that name is that that person has to give us permission, written permission. So if you ask, if you're interviewing people, ask them not to name other people.
Yeah, great. That's a really good tip.
Or if they do name other people, it's people who they know they can access, they can find out, and they can get to sign. We were able to get quite a lot of people signed secondary, but a lot of people after 10 years have moved on, disappeared, and so there's little black kind of intervals. Someone's telling a story, and the sound fades, and then goes back up.
So I suppose like you could, if you were recording, you could use something like, I had a friend who, rather than kind of give names and details.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Last question as well I have. The Maze Long Kesh is gone, isn't it? It's demolished.
It's reduced to 5 buildings. There's a nominal promise to build this International Reconciliation Centre. Nominal. It won't be built. And 5 buildings, there's a conservation order in 5 buildings, a church, a hospital, etc. It's still standing as that.
Yeah. My question was going to be, do you think something should be done with it, or do you think that it should be kind of just recorded and then be given to serve a different purpose for the community? So that was actually my question. So there is plans for that centre to go in, but you don't think that it's going to kind of come to fruition?
No, the parties have compromised in that because it's such a massive site, they've allowed parts of it to be used for a horticultural annual show. And air, it's not actually air display. These are really old planes. The site was previously a Royal Air Force runway. And so it's old planes in a museum there. So they're allowing different parts of it to be used. But I think obviously a group like Sinn Féin would really like it still to happen.
Yeah.
The DUP definitely would not like it to happen. I can't see that kind of tension ever being resolved. So I don't know. I think that what both have agreed is that they'll try and use as much of the land as possible without encroaching on the 5 buildings.
I get you. That's definitely something you can see reflected in loads of different communities that might lay claim to a certain place, and they might have different ways of viewing it, and then it's trying to mitigate that within those communities and making sure that both are happy with the way the space is kind of continued to be used and things. So it's definitely a recurring theme. Recurring challenge.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cahal. Does anyone else have any questions before we finish up for the evening?
First of all, just want to say thanks so much for the presentation. It was so interesting, and I definitely need to have a look on the website and watch some of the clips. Question is sort of about, you talked about a lot of issues with the funding at the time, and obviously attitudes towards that changed and made it easier. But since you've released the archival footage for members of the public over the years since that's been done, have you noticed a change in attitude, whether that's from individuals or political parties themselves, about the existence of the archives, the fact that it is inclusive, or some of the footage and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think overall it's been very positive. I think the Public Record Office absolutely love it. We have a really strong partner there. They love it because it complements their archive, but also because it draws people in. And I think that's also, there's a degree of pressure on certain government ministries to make their services more accessible to the public. And I think our archive, because it's moving image, encourages people to come in, and they're at public record office, there are school trips, there's all sorts of things going on. So I think they're really pleased with it, and we're really pleased with their kind of hosting and managing, curating, not so much curating of it, but managing of that. So I think the key things are the inclusivity and the fact that it is audio-visual. Those two things, I think, means that people can kind of relate in a way that's at an emotional, sensory level. It's not reading a heavy document and trying to interpret it. They're listening to people. So I think it's been of great use. Yeah. I hope that answers, Aoife.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Perfect. So if there's no more questions, we might close for tonight. I just want to say thank you again so much for joining us. I'm definitely going to be deep diving into the film archive in the next couple of days. But yeah, thank you so much for that.
That's great. And I'd recommend, Cara, if you know, because it can be quite intimidating, there's so much stuff there. There's like on the website alone, there's 99 little clips. But
Yes.
2 areas to start with, I think, are quite useful. And they're the 2 films.
Yeah.
That's the Maze and Long, it's Armagh Stories, and We Were There. Those are very good places to start, I think, to get a flavour.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So our next talk, and the last one in the series before we finish for Christmas, is going to take place next Tuesday, the 17th of December, and it's Tracing Your Irish Ancestors in the National Archives of the United Kingdom with James Cronin of the National Archives UK. So he's going to provide an overview of the National Archives UK and help you trace, and all the tools that they have there to help you trace your Irish ancestors, such as records of migration, military service, nursing records, merchant navy service records, officials in the custom and excise and the Coast Guard, probate records, convict records as well. So James will go through everything that's available there. And he himself is a maritime record specialist with the National Archives, and he's worked with the Merchant Navy, the Customs Exercise and the Coast Guard too. So that should be a really interesting talk to finish up with. And then we'll be kicking off again on the 16th of January with a talk on available funding for community groups with the Heritage Council, and there'll be more information sent out on that in the mail out on the 20th of December. So we'll see everyone next Tuesday, hopefully. And thank you again so much to Cahal for joining us. It was a really, really interesting talk.
Great. And one thing I forgot, I'll send to you, Cara, the book that we edited by the team from the archive has chapters by specialists. So there's archivists, editors, project workers, outreach workers, and they can home in a lot more detail that might help some people doing similar work. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I'll link that. So we make a post on our website every time we upload a recording in our members section. So I'll link that in underneath where your post will be uploaded so everyone can access it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Nice to meet you. All the
Thank
best.
you so much.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.